for September 25th, 2024. Alphabetical roll call, please.
Clark Brewer here.
Tom Callahan here.
Amy Glassmar here.
Kevin Hine here.
Birgit, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm muted, and Birgit Schmidt-Fischer here.
Okay, and Deirdre told me she'd be here, but she had a hard leave at 8 o'clock, so. All right, let's jump right into it. This is, hold on, I'm sorry. What am I doing? Share, hold on, sorry about that.
Peter's coming in now, just so you know.
Okay. This is the document with everything up to date that I worked with the select board last night. The select board, by the way, I guess everybody knows by now, all of the articles from the Springtown meeting were approved by the AG. The select board last night, we dealt with 7 of the articles that they have advanced for us to go ahead with our public hearing on. The only ones they didn't do was the cluster, the cluster development, the frontage, and the development impact. None of those they had copies of yet. So we'll deal with that, and I'm going to meet with the select board again next Tuesday to get them to move those forward for our public hearing. Those 3 will be in a public hearing on the 16th, the others on the 9th. So I want us to go right to, so Carolyn is here. The development impact.
Okay.
And the other thing, you know, and the way I presented these to the select board the other day, I'm going to move the order of these around for what ultimately shows up on the warrant and how I'm going to present it to the public on Monday, going from non-controversial to, you know, things that are going to have debate. So we leave the debatable ones and the possible losses to the end and not jeopardize the things that should be simple. So Carolyn, if you want to start.
Just a quick question with that, Tom. Is there any chance we could move land alteration further up? And I was kind of thinking.
So the order I'm thinking of is wind and solar is 1 and 2. The restoring that note to Article 4, its table that the zoning board want would be number 3. The floodplain change that MAPC did would be number 4. The ADU one is really not controversial. That would be number 5. Number 6 would be land alteration. Number 7 would be, well, actually, no, Number 6 would be the development impact. Number 7 would be land alteration. Number 8 would be floor area ratio. And number 9, frontage. And number 10, the residential cluster development. So that's how I'm looking at it right now. And it moved very smoothly and quickly last night with the select board doing it in that order. But, you know, again, we can play with it once the warrant gets.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
we'll see.
I thought the first ones were more land related, you know, kind of land and lot related, and then including up to land alteration. And I mean, yes,
yeah, I don't see land alteration as being super controversial because we're not making really well, they're making a substantive change. We're taking away exemptions, but
right.
You know,
Okay.
But we'll see. I mean, I'm you know, I'm going to do a publicity blast myself on 143, maybe starting tonight, to hopefully we get some, you know, attendance at this public forum and we can get some meaningful feedback from people.
Right. That's also a question, like, did we, yeah, kind of who are we notifying about the meeting, you know, or how are we notifying about the meeting? I talked to a couple of people and they, you know, oh, we don't know anything about it. And I forwarded the email, Cassandra, that you had sent. So
well, I'll probably put something on 143 tonight. And what time is it, by the way? Is it 6:30 or 7?
6:30.
6:30.
Okay. And you know, I suppose it's on the town's webpage. I would just ask everybody to just publicize it to your email lists in town and just tell everybody. I mean, again, we're always at a disadvantage that we don't have a paper of record. The Cohasset Anchor has reached out to me, but they did last spring and ended up not publishing anything, so I'm kind of skeptical, but I'll respond to her and, you know, get her something. Anyway, so where is,
Tom, I have a question or a comment.
yeah,
Okay. Why don't we make signs? And at least put them around the downtown?
knock yourself out. I mean, I don't have time.
Who's paying for those?
Yeah, I don't have time to do it.
Maybe the town ought to pay for the signs.
Well,
Can we,
the town has those neon things that they put up to announce town meeting. I don't know if that can be done to.
What
Mhm.
about the electric sign that is often on South?
That's the one that's the one I'm talking about, neon.
Yeah,
electric,
Chris
however it
Senior
is.
has to talk to the police department to set that up. So that's
okay.
like he needs to do it.
Well, yeah, but that's not a
May
big,
not choose, he may
Right.
not choose to do it.
All right, Cassandra, if you don't mind, inquire about that. So we
Yes, I can inquire.
All right. All right, where in this is the changes to the I'm sorry. Oh, here it is. Okay. So Carolyn, I assumed from our last meeting, you've made some changes.
I did. So one of the
Well,
things,
and the other thing is, just for the organizational structure of this, let's not try to patch it into somewhere else. Just let's have it as Article 11 of the bylaw. That's
Right.
That's what we reserved it for, and we'll number it to be part of Article 11.
no, that is right. So I took out that suggestion that this could be dispersed in other sections of the bylaw. So that's gone from the draft you saw last week. The only change in the purposes section is that highlighted text to make it clear that we are talking about public or private roads when we're talking about, infrastructure and roads.
Mm-hmm.
And then in paragraph B, we spent an awful lot of time last week talking about to what projects or what size projects should this bylaw apply.
Right. And
And
can we focus on that for a minute? Because that's going to be an
Sure.
important thing that the public is going to want to know. And
sure. So the consensus I took away from your discussion last week was, if you remember, we had previously a whole variety, like a menu, if you will, depending upon how many traffic trips you generated or how many square feet the project might involve. After some discussion, what I thought was the consensus of the board was that this would apply to any project that was going to require a special permit or site plan review. So the only question, I've amended that, so it makes it a little bit simpler now. The only thing that you see highlighted there in paragraph B is just my question as to what about large house plan review? That I suppose in some circles it's certainly a form of site plan review.
Yeah.
But if you really want to make sure the large houses are subject to this mitigation bylaw, I would suggest that we actually specifically reference it here in paragraph B. If you ultimately don't want it to apply to single family houses, then that highlighted language comes out.
All right, but saying it's subject to special permit or site plan review is also going to capture commercial and mixed use.
Correct.
Correct. Okay, so there should be
Yeah.
no doubt about that. And did we mention, is it still in here that it would capture subdivisions under chapter 325?
That doesn't explicitly come in here. And here's what I was thinking about that. One is that a subdivision is just the creation of lots. What somebody ultimately does with those lots, whether it's a commercial subdivision or whether it's a residential subdivision, kind of remains to be seen. So they'd have to come back before the board for whatever the use would ultimately be.
Yeah.
So my thought was you will then capture those projects through either site plan or site plan review after the subdivision has been approved.
Well, one of the things I was concerned with is that when we dealt with the Black Horse Lane subdivision,
Mhm.
we really didn't have a legal authority to demand them to, run a sidewalk down Black Horse Lane or repave all of Black Horse Lane or anything like that. And that's what part of this was supposed to get at, was to give us the legal basis to say under the subdivision, to be able to require this kind of mitigation.
So here's one of the problems you often come up against with a subdivision is a developer could come in and let's say it's a 6-lot subdivision. Developer comes in and the subdivision gets approved. Then those house lots all get sold. And people then come in one by one for an individual building permit for a single family house. We don't necessarily capture, or depending upon the decisions you make here tonight, we aren't necessarily going to capture that scenario of a subdivision that is simply laid out and then lots sold to other people to seek the building permits.
Well, there's a lot of infrastructure involved with a
Mhm.
subdivision.
Yeah,
A 10-house subdivision, using Heritage Lane, 14-house subdivision, there's roadway drainage, wetland mitigation issues, sidewalk curbing, trees, other plantings that would be, that's separate from each individual house. I mean, it seems like both commercial and residential subdivisions should be captured in this mitigation, because those are the big money types of projects, and they're, in the case of the 14-lot subdivision, the developer is poised to make money off of selling the lots. Whether it makes sense to include single family houses or not, maybe that should be discussed more thoroughly.
So if we wanted to add subdivisions back in, which we can certainly do you want to establish some sort of minimum size? Should it be,
5-house or larger, that kind of thing.
well, I
well,
or,
look
you
at,
know,
look at,
Five lot.
come
five
up with
lot.
how many lots they actually create.
well, what was Black Horse Lane? It was 4 lots.
Yes.
So,
I kind of think, compared to, the single family house mitigation approach, it seems like you want to get the subdivision up front, and I'm not sure, maybe 3 lots, 4
yeah,
would be a minimum.
what the board can do with this will be discretionary on a case-by-case basis. And, in a given situation, we may say, okay, a 3-lot subdivision isn't going to create any significant impact given where it's located. But, Black Horse Lane was only 4 lots.
Right.
It had a significant impact to the people on the old part of Black Horse Lane. So,
Right. For an example, you might have a 3 or 4 lot subdivision that you're creating, and you have a 50-foot section of sidewalk that would connect that subdivision up with existing infrastructure, and maybe that would be a reasonable ask for a 3 to 4 lot creation, whereas a 15 to 20 or 30 lot subdivision, it could be scalable, and as you say, it's at our discretion. Then I think it's reasonable to not have necessarily a minimum. You could waive it if it seems like whoever's doing the project is thinking things through and trying to make it fit. Or be a little harder if the particular developer seems like they're trying to skate, if you know what I mean.
yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah,
I'll
so
add in any
yeah,
residential or
subdivisions,
commercial
yeah.
subdivision of creating 3 or more lots.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, as far as Clark, you weren't here.
Sorry, Tom, Amy has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, let me just say one thing to Clark about, one thing you missed in the discussion last week was with respect to the single family homes, there's a situation that Amy brought up in the neighborhood where, multiple single family lots were being developed simultaneously, blasting away, causing, potential damage to the road or wear and tear on the road. And the thought is, how are we capturing that? I don't think the individual true single family lot is something we necessarily have to capture. But, you know, what happens when there's multiple lots being developed at the same time? They're not a subdivision because they all have frontage on a road, you know, on a road. That's
And they've already been
exactly,
divided.
exactly what happened up in Howes Lane, you know, is, how do we deal with that? Because that multiple simultaneous development of lots can have an impact on infrastructure.
Yeah, and Amy's examples, I've certainly experienced in my neighborhood where a developer offloads equipment out on North Main Street and rips up the asphalt and then brings heavy trucks in and damages the roadway and then leaves. And the only problem is you kind of have to inventory everything and have like motion cameras to capture every delivery and every truck trip. And I've kind of done some of that again in my neighborhood in terms of recording damage and trying to capture which individual truck it was from, which subcontractor. And you know, on any given single family house, there's, you know, a dozen trucks or equipment operators all coming at different times. And if you don't capture with a camera that person who's creating the damage at that time, and I live here, I mean, it's nearly impossible unless you require a developer to set up motion cameras and things like that where they're loading, offloading, and transporting heavy materials.
Well, another question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I can't see Amy, so if she's got her hand up, go ahead, Amy.
So I want to sort of roll this back a little bit to get some insight as to the reference to Heritage Lane, and then I want to bring it up to the multiple houses individually being developed. So in the case of Heritage Lane, since it came before us just recently, the citizens who came before us basically said that the developer had not undertaken the necessary infrastructure repairs that they had anticipated, right?
The sidewalk, right?
Right, and they obviously did not, at least sound to me like they had configured an HOA that actually has the capacity to supervise the situation that was causing the problem, and it's probably gonna, whatever in the future, it's gonna run into that same set of problems because they have not established an HOA that's got teeth that it can actually do something about. In our case, at this point, the end of our conversation about the Heritage Lane case was we can't do anything about that. Right? That was our recommendation to our notification to the citizens that it's their responsibility to oversee that. So that's one kind of a case, right? It's a subdivision. We need to school people better at how to get an HOA together and actually operate it and put the right amount of money in it and all of those sort of things. In the case of the work that's being done and has been done on Jerusalem Road, that's a different case, right? It's single properties, 2 or 3 owned by one developer, and then other developers, and probably a total of 6 houses have been built in the last 10 years. While it is difficult to track what happens, I think what we have to do in each instance, if we have multiple units being done at the same time, is to basically address each one of the developers and put the onus on the developer. They should play the cop for the maintenance of the landscape and infrastructure around them. We shouldn't have to chase after the trucks ourselves.
I agree. I'm just suggesting that the developer or somebody set up camera traps so that, or motion activated cameras so that any damage, they know exactly who's done what for the duration of the project. That would be a way to do it as opposed to my method, which was, there's a truck driving across my front yard. I'm gonna run out with a camera and get his license
All right,
plate.
Okay, so are we able, this is a question to Carolyn. Are we able to do that? Does that seem realistic? Does it incur significant costs? Who's going to pay for those investigative tools that we're talking about using? Do we need to codify that now? Or can we create a general statement that sort of implies that there'll be supervision on behalf of the developer to ensure that the infrastructure that is surrounding the project is actually made whole again?
Well,
Can we do that?
well, in part, you have to back up and start with, that's exactly what this bylaw is intended to do, in part. But you have to think about what are the uses to which this is going to apply. Because if we're talking about, we have to have our hook, right? We have to have our ability to, how do we get a developer before somebody, whether that's the zoning board or the planning board, how do we get a developer in front of you for some sort of permit? So we've got some leverage where we can assess all of these potential impacts and we can impose conditions or demand mitigation. And if we're going to say that this is going to apply to every single family house out there, I think you're going to get some resistance, because now the cost of building a single family house is going to go up significantly. Now, maybe that's, a risk you want to take, or you want to have that debate at town meeting floor, and that's certainly your decision to make. But there has to be some sort of mechanism, adopting a bylaw that simply says, every developer shall be responsible for an assessment of the pre and post construction site and restoring any damage. It's got no teeth unless someone is actually saying, well, what was the pre-construction condition? What was the post-construction condition? We will likely wind up going back to like Tom's scenario of what happens to a road, for example, when you have serial applications, and just over time that road is just slowly eroding away.
Right.
Like we saw that argument at Black Horse Lane, in part, that if you are the sixth heavy truck that comes in, with to pour the foundation, and that's when the culvert suddenly gives way, that developer is going to say to us, the wear and tear on the road wasn't exclusively my fault. So
Lawsuits, Carolyn, right? I mean, we had that here on Howe Road. Amy knows that. Not all of these houses that went up on our street didn't go up consecutively. So they went up and then another one went up, and that was after the other two were kind of done, but the landscape wasn't done, but then the pool wasn't put in. So who's going to wind up being responsible for all of the road deterioration? Because it's been 5 or 6 years now at this point, and they're still going up and down the street. So I
Well, what's the role of bonding? I mean, essentially, what are our options from a financial mechanism perspective? I mean, in the end, if what Clark says is a feasible approach, which seems to be intense oversight, but nonetheless, it does capture the situation. And there has to be a way by which accountability is established, the conditions to begin with, and then accountability. And maybe we have to have a bond for each one of the properties that are being developed. I mean, maybe that's the only way we can do it.
Well, we don't do that for individual house construction. We do it for subdivisions, but not because subdivisions install infrastructure, install new infrastructure.
Right, but
You
in
don't
this,
do it, and
in this
I
instance,
don't, look, I don't want this to fail because we overreach. I think it's difficult to regulate an individual house's construction in that way, and it becomes a burden at some point that's beyond reason.
Well, I think
The,
that you can have for the simple,
the trigger we have here that Carolyn has written, that if it's all, if the house, or maybe multiple houses, is requiring a special permit or site plan review, that's a trigger. I think the large home review should be a trigger as well, because it's a form of site plan review. And, you know, beyond that, you know, I'll give the example of the rebuild of the house on my street that's gone on all summer. It's just one house, gutted, totally rebuilt, lots of truck traffic, you know, the road is okay, but you know, we had a lot of activity up here all summer long. I don't know that we can make too many demands on that beyond the property lines. You know, unless it becomes a condition of a building permit, you know, if John Hallen has some power under the building permit.
Tom, I think I think I agree with you. I think we need to be cautious that we're not trying to do too much in one space. My experience, and I don't have a lot of experience, I've told you guys this with the land and the planning and all that, but what I do know is politically, you try to do too much in a small space, Carolyn will tell you this, in a specific piece of legislation or bylaw, you're gonna get caught. So I think we need to be smart. I know we all would like to see a lot more control for the town, and I agree with that. But I think we have to be smart about what we're trying to do here, because the one development, and unfortunately Howe Road wound up like that. We had a developer with 2 houses, 2 lots, and then another developer further up, and then somebody who bought a private piece. And since then, and then some stuff down on Tad Lane, the road is destroyed. I understand, and it's awful, and it stinks, and it just makes the whole thing terrible, and the floods and the water, trust me, our yard is flooded when that rain comes down. So, but I think we need to be practical about what we can do in this bylaw that's actually going to allow the developers who show up at the town meetings, who are town people, they live in town, I get what they're doing, but we need to make it reasonable for them so that they don't feel like we're just trying to cut them out completely. And that's a very tricky piece, and Carolyn probably could speak to that more directly about making sure that we're making this as tight as we want it for now.
Is Carolyn, thing you can do just through the building permit process to add a
No,
bonding
don't
requirement?
even complete that thought. No,
Yeah,
you
all right.
can't. That's the problem with saying like an as of right use being subject to this. There
Yeah.
is no mechanism to attach conditions, you know, the building inspector looks at, does it comply with zoning?
Yep.
Does it comply with the building code permit issues? There's no ability for, you know, John Hallen or anybody else to say, oh, well, that's going to generate an awful lot of traffic, or that's going to have, it's going to go on over a 12-month period and really, you know, deteriorate the condition of the roadway. It's a binary choice, you know, grant the permit or deny the permit. There's no conditions attached, which
Okay.
is why I think going the route of linking this to special permits or site plan review or the subdivisions and large house plan review, you've got that mechanism that there is some sort of level of review where you can condition the project.
I agree. Thank you for that explanation, because the public will want to know that too. So, I think this is what we, you know, again, special permit, site plan reviews, subdivisions of 3 or more, and large home review projects.
And in some cases, you know, you have a private way like how that each individual is going to be responsible for the cost of the upgrade when that time comes. As well as public ways where the taxpayers are, and they're different kind of classes. In some cases, the town engineers note that specific damage has been caused by a developer from recent activities and call them on it. But I think there can be a reasonable assigning of protection of these resources that seems fair, that wouldn't necessarily kill the intent of the larger developer providing impact or mitigation.
Carolyn, is there some way to follow up on that with Clark? In other words, so private ways, each individual developer or private homeowner who buys a piece of property has to be responsible for, and then we have to figure out how we determine deterioration of the infrastructure. As opposed to somebody who buys 5 lots and then is developing them all and selling them all. I mean, this is a different entity on Howe Road than some other places where you have somebody developing Black Horse Lane, where he's developing all of them for himself to sell.
Right.
Is,
Well, again, by now adding in subdivisions so that this is going to be applicable to subdivisions of 3 or more, be it residential or commercial, you're going to pick up that developer now. So the Black Horse Lane situation will be able to be replicated. You can deal with the infrastructure, roadways, sidewalks, drainage, whatever it happens to be that you think is going to be impacted by that project. You know, the problem with private roads, and I know there are a lot of them in Cohasset, but the problem with private roads is that while we could condition a project, or we could even require mitigation for the project, the town doesn't have the ownership rights to force work to be done on private property. You know, we see this all the time. You look at all of the properties that have been in on 3A, and we all talk about traffic or a stoplight or something else on 3A, but we all stop ourselves and say, oh, that's in the jurisdiction of the Department, you know, of Transportation. It's not that much different when we're talking about a private road, except that that road isn't owned by Mass DOT. That road is owned by everybody who has a lot that abuts that road. So those, whether it's a homeowners association or whether it is just a loose, you know, association of the residents who abut that road, they have the ability to bring a claim for damages on their own for that way.
But
Similarly,
lawsuit litigation is that's hard. I mean,
it is hard. It is hard, but
the-
the town doesn't have standing, you know, to enforce or to bring litigation to repair a private way.
Right.
So
It's a big problem for the given the fact that we haven't accepted any subdivision since like the 80s. I mean, the repair is covered under Mass General Law, under our general bylaw, and under the memo of understanding, where a certain percentage or number of homeowners on a private way have to agree to do the upgrade, and everybody pays. It's a betterment system like in Cedar Acres from a few years ago, where if you don't have the money to pay, then the town does the work, and then you get an extra bill on your tax bill until that gets paid off.
I don't know that that's true everywhere because, you know,
Private ways.
since I've lived here, Hillside Drive's been repaved once and I didn't have to pay for it.
Well, that's
And it gets plowed.
the interesting part of that is that's the way it used to be, where I think they used the length of private ways for Chapter 90 funds to the state, and felt that it was fair to upgrade both private and public ways. the slush fund that was established at town meeting a year or so ago only covered public ways and sort of established a repair. The issue of private ways was brought up at town meeting, but never resolved or addressed as a follow-up. But yes,
right.
Tom, that used to be the system where Carl would resurface your road if you were on the list and
Yeah,
you were,
yeah, maybe I should just keep that quiet.
Well,
okay,
no, I do want to be clear, there, by law, and if the town also adopts a bylaw, the town can make repairs to private ways.
right.
A lot of towns, restrict that though, like, okay, yes, take snow plowing right out of it because that's a public health emergency situation. You've got to get in there and plow and be able to get an ambulance in there regardless. But the town doesn't have to pave anybody's roads. But if they are going to pave private roads, sometimes they do set up parameters about that. But it's just as difficult to then say the town may get permission to say repave a private road, as it sounds like they did for Hillside, but to then tell a developer, you're now also going to repair a private road. That's somebody else's property. And what material is you going to use? Are you going to use a contractor that we all agree upon? Are you going to grind it all the way down and rebuild it? Or are you just kind of going to, put a top coat over it that's going to come off with the first snowfall and snow plowing of the season?
Yeah, these all are irrelevant because it becomes a cluster.
Carolyn, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Have any successful claims been made with regard to private ways in the Commonwealth by a town or a city that those private ways and the rights to them were not maintained by the parties that had that right conveyed to them at some point in time? With regard to Howe Road, the property, the privacy of the road has never been asserted. Not in 10 plus years and probably in tens of years. At that point, does that mean it really isn't a private way because that has never been maintained? Or is there any obligation to maintain the privacy of a way, or is it lost? I guess it gets into the weeds here, but I'm just trying to understand.
No, that's fair because you bring up a good point, Kevin, in that when we say public ways, we should really say town ways, meaning town meeting has voted to accept responsibility for this road. There are lots of private ways that might be private and gated, and limited access to them. And then there are private ways that are open to the public and may look and have all the characteristics of a public way to someone who hasn't done a title search or who hasn't gone through the town meeting records to really ascertain that, oh my goodness, I can't believe that town meeting never actually accepted Main Street, for example, as a town road. So that's the only real distinction there. To answer your question, any case law where the town has ever brought some sort of action against a private homeowner or homeowners for failure to maintain a private way, I can't think of any. What I have seen happen more likely than not is that owners of private ways will petition to have their road accepted as a town way, usually because the condition has fallen in such repair and the homeowners association or just the homeowners don't really have the means to put something out to bid with specifications and upgrade and do all of the work that needs to be done. And then you usually have an awful lot of debate on the floor of town meeting about, there are some towns I know that they won't accept your private way as a town road unless it's been brought up to current
Right.
subdivision standards. you know, because they don't want it to be, sure, dump the street that's in disrepair on the town's laps. Now the taxpayers bear the burden. And now I'm the person, you know, who was on the next public street, you know, in line to be paved next year. And I've just gone down on the list. You know, that's the kind of debate you wind up having at town meeting. But, you know, on the other hand, you all pay taxes, but you don't necessarily all get the same services.
Right, and Carl's over the years just done repairs. If he needs to do a repair or a repave a section of a private way, it doesn't matter. It's all on the list. So he's done it. It wasn't until the Cedar Acres issue came up where they had a road in disrepair, and that nobody realized it was a unaccepted subdivision roadway, and the selectmen came up with a memo of understanding saying whoever whoever lives on the way has to pay.
Well, yeah, what we're doing now is getting to the point of kind of reinvestigating that particular decision, right? The town could, in fact, renege on that rule, right? They could essentially see it null and void and establish a policy of maintenance. And even if it meant our taxes went up, our roadbeds would be better, right? I mean, that was a moment in time when a set of citizens decided, nope, we're not going to do it. Maybe it's time to revisit the issue and say, we actually are a pretty wealthy town and we need to maintain our roads.
Right. Well, the slush fund from like a year ago was for roads, but just for public ways. And again, the private way, which is like 60% of the ways are private, came
Right.
up, but it never got resolved. And as far as I know, the selectmen haven't addressed it. Nobody's followed up on it, but maybe we could. I mean, it's the issue of public and private ways is sort of a planning board issue, but I think maybe it's not something we can resolve tonight, since it's we might have to file that away as on our to-do list for the planning board.
So
I agree.
Okay, well,
So can we ask Carolyn to configure a language that would allow us to get as close to what we're trying to do so that we could actually put this on the warrant?
Well, respectfully, I think that's what this draft does.
Yes.
Yep.
Because now, again, you're not going to capture every single family house unless you want to go that far. But at a minimum, you're going to capture most large developments, commercial and residential subdivisions, site plan review, large house reviews, and the developer is going to have to provide a development impact assessment to the zoning board or the planning board, depending upon who the permit granting authority happens to be. And then we have the assessment of options of mitigation that could include demands that roadways or sidewalks or trees, whatever happens to be destroyed or might be impacted, would be restored to its pre-construction state, if not better.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Why don't we go through the rest of it before we
Yeah, in the
Before it
interest
gets
of
too late.
time, is there any other of your edits here that need a decision from us?
No, because we've we've got I didn't make any changes relative to the development impact assessment, what they should be asked to look at, and then the mitigation options. The only thing I guess I would, a couple of comments. One, I think Clark earlier mentioned, the ability to grant waivers. I did not include the ability to grant waivers in here, because when you get to paragraph D, which is the mitigation that can be imposed, it is discretionary. It is may. You may impose these conditions, and it may include any sort of a combination, or maybe just one of these that the board feels is appropriate. The one I would ask to just draw your attention to is, it's paragraph D3. If we could scroll down a little bit about, and this was my question. This was language about, loss of, when you've got a lot of trees that are cut down and loss of carbon sequestration or habitat. And this actually comes from another town's bylaw that was in reaction to solar farms coming in. And they had an awful lot of forest lands on the books that they were losing as a result of this. I am, correct me if I'm wrong, but I wasn't able to locate an awful lot of forest land in Cohasset that isn't already in the hands of some kind of like wildlands trust or conservation trust, land that is already protected and not necessarily susceptible to development. If, so my thought was on this one that rather than have this special mitigation called out for loss of forest land, we could just instead rely on the highlighted text there, where if any project was going to involve clear cutting or removal of a certain square footage or percentage of a lot,
All right,
vegetation, then we could require some on-site or off-site equivalent
Right.
contribution.
if we do a percentage, we have in the land alteration bylaw a clearing limit that we allow as a right.
Right.
I mean, do we just have to match that, or do we have to say,
Or maybe if it exceeds that threshold from the land alteration bylaw.
well, I guess I guess if it exceeds it under the land alteration bylaw, you're looking at a special permit, or you're looking at a variance on a developed, and I think this is where you might distinguish a lot that's already developed and one that's a virgin piece of land. And I think if we have a virgin piece of land, and yes, they can clear up to 70% or 65%, whatever it is, 80% on a commercial, they can do it. But should there be some mitigation for what is now 100% covered, which, as a result of development, is only going to be 25% covered.
Well,
If-
think
if-
of Rattlesnake Run with this
Yeah, exactly.
language.
I'm sorry, say that.
Think of the Rattlesnake Run project with this. I mean, I think the loss of carbon and sequestration, I can't even pronounce it, might freak out some of my conservative friends. Just as a line item. I know, I don't
It
have
could
any,
just as easily.
I don't
be-
have any conservative friends.
No, it
I
could
know.
just as easily be mitigation for loss of significant tree canopy.
Yes,
All right, well, I guess my problem is how do we sync it with the land alteration bylaw? Do we go back in the land alteration bylaw and say you can clear to these percentages, but subject to possible mitigation under Article 11, Section D3?
maybe, I don't know.
I would then say, I would put a square footage limit. I would use this highlighted language, put 5,000 square feet. And then we go back to the land alteration article and say the clearing limits are also subject to 11 point whatever we're calling it.
Is there a way to combine these? I was thinking that large home review and land alteration should probably be done at the same time, or the ledge thing. That mitigation and special permit or site plan review could easily be done as a part of one hearing, as opposed to
Yeah.
completing one hearing and then come back in, you have to take care of this ledge thing.
No, I think we can do simultaneous hearings, right?
Yeah, this isn't requiring a separate
Separate,
development
special,
impact
different.
special permit.
Good.
So you would be applying
So-
this the same way you'd look at, say, parking.
So if you do a subdivision, then you do this and the mitigation components or land alteration components at the same time.
Right.
Okay, that's good.
So then the last one that.
So we put in, using that highlighted language, put in 5,000 square feet, and then I'm looking back up here. On the clearing thresholds, we might want to go in there and add what is this section? The clearing section, which is clearing thresholds, which is subsection D, the land alteration, and add a paragraph 6 to it that says, notwithstanding the above, clearing may be subject to possible mitigation pursuant to Article 11.
Just a editorial note, at 3, yeah, there's spelling of clearing is incorrect.
Yeah, that's crossing out a small c. That was an edit, so
Okay.
it'll be cleaned up by the time town meeting comes along. You see further
Actually-
down.
Actually, no, it has to stay that way because the.
All right,
AG
that's fine.
is
Yeah, that's fine. I
following
just,
The visual of the changes.
no, I know. I just, I'm, as a lawyer, I capitalize defined terms so
Yep,
that
that's
everybody
okay.
knows they're a defined term. So,
The
so
version I
if
have-
that's what we maybe should do, is add a 6 to D and under the land alteration and just say it's possibly subject to a mitigation requirement under Article 11.
The version I have is the 14th of September, and we're always gonna have a new updated and new updates and tweaks. Right, I just ask, since I print these things out for every meeting, that we all get the most recent version for review.
Yeah, we are. This is the version that Cassandra gave me for the select board last night. This is the most recent, so. All right, can we do that, Carolyn?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, all right. All right, is there anything else that I'm looking at the clock. I just want to,
Yep.
is there anything else for the mitigation that we have to decide upon?
Just paragraph 5, I really question whether we need this or whether we just defer to the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission, the Board of Health. I'm trying to avoid overlapping reviews of things.
Yeah,
Right.
okay, take 5 out then.
Okay.
I hate to do this, but does the situation of the clearing specification overlap with the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission?
Not necessarily, the conservation.
Could.
It could.
But it could, but it could.
It could if a wetland was, conservation's geographic determination, geographic jurisdiction is 100 feet from a resource area. So if there was a resource area, yes, there would be overlapping jurisdiction, just like there is for floodplains between Concom and ZBA.
Or
happens.
stormwater for Concom and Planning Board.
But taking out
Right.
this paragraph 5 is trying to, is going to give the impression of an overlap that doesn't need to exist.
Yeah, on this one, we should probably have more active discussions on what aspect of the single family. Because it would be great to get this on the books and see how it actually works. And not have it necessarily torpedoed by people who are in the single family business.
Well, I think since we put triggers on size, based on size, I think we capture, we're being reasonable, number one. And again, since our power would be discretionary, we may find in an individual house, let's say it's 5,000 square feet, it's under large home review, that we don't need any mitigation. It's going to be really case by case. There might be another situation. where
I know,
mitigation-
but in terms of passing it, and
Well-
the public perception, it may be so new and so complex that nobody quite understands it, but I think that it's worth discussing and getting everyone's input on.
That's why we're floating it, to get some hopefully get some feedback and from our fellow boards as well. The select board has been weighing, we'll weigh in on this Tuesday, then the zoning board, it looks like I'm going to meet with them on October 8th, the night before our public hearing starts. So we will get some input. Again, the biggest one I want, of course, is the public, and we got to get the publicity out and get fannies in the seats. We only had 7 at the forum that we did for the spring.
Again, I'm just talking about a strategy so that, the whole thing doesn't gets the 2/3.
Yeah, no, I don't want it
it-
defeated.
it-
If it
it-
looks like it's gonna be defeated, we'll just withdraw it, but, I think,
Well, you would take it for a vote unless you have like letters to the editor in the imaginary paper and great outrage on the part of the development
well,
community.
yeah, well, again, that remains to be seen, but we have flexibility in how we react to what we hear, so. All right, let's move on in the interest of time. I know Deirdre has a hard leave at 8:30. So,
I think she said 8.
8, I'm sorry, you're right. And here we go on this. Let's go to the floor area ratio. So I said this to you guys last week. I said it to the select board last night. You know, I'm not wedded to these numbers. The justification for the numbers is based on average house sizes up through 2020, at least 2021. I think Brigitte in her email, I don't know how many saw it, probably just to me. But
I saw it.
okay.
She was suggesting a rounding off. You know,
Yeah,
the
yeah, and
biggest thing that jumps
I
out at
don't,
me based on this table is it seems like you cross out max lot coverage and you cross out the 20, but when you have 20 next to 17, it looks like it's only a 3% reduction.
no, well,
Residence A.
that will come in the explanation.
Well, I think it's important because right now it looks like you're having the FAR for residence C and you're reducing by 3% for residence A, when in fact a 2-story house would be 40%. A house with a finished basement.
All right, well, then
and attic
perhaps
would be
what we have to do is
60%.
show the column that's being deleted, which is maximum, I forget what it's called, maximum coverage building, I think.
But it's not, the numbers aren't the same numbers, but they're.
I know that, so
together.
this chart just needs to be amended by having the column that's being eliminated shown being eliminated, and then have the new column, which is maximum floor area ratio. And then it follows on the explanation of what the difference between the footprint measurement and the FAR measurement is, so.
Again, that seems like a structural issue for a presentation on the floor of town
Right,
meeting
okay.
and drafting for the warrant.
All right, that chart right there can be changed tomorrow as soon as.
Ms. Glassmeyer circulated some great thoughts, research on FAR, but there's one other thing that we haven't talked about at all. And just so you know, this floor area ratio to me doesn't work.
Of course it doesn't.
It works for towns like Brookline and Newton. I see this as being on the cutting edge and the numbers are wrong. But the definition of floor area ratio is already in our bylaw. And interestingly enough, it uses the sum of the net floor area of buildings on a lot to the lot area, but it also excludes any wetlands areas. So if you have an acre lot in residence B and half of it is wetlands, then that would have an impact on what your FAR could be, as well as when you go to the definition of net floor area, it's like any space that's designed for human habitation. So basements, finished attics, basements that are finished. I mean, though it does exclude garages. It excludes garages and unenclosed porches. But in trying to think of, large houses that we've seen and how they play themselves out, the actual numbers are related to a great extent by these definitions, which we haven't discussed, and we haven't looked at examples of how that might how these changes might impact specific houses that we know or specific
Yeah,
properties
but we
that we
can,
know about.
Two of the select board members, one voted to promote this, to let this keep going, one didn't. And I think they're thinking the trap that lots of people are gonna fall into, and people at town meeting will fall into, is thinking about their own house. And thinking about an addition.
Well, that's what people know best.
I know that,
Not
but
necessarily a
the
trap.
whole point of proportional zoning here is that the structure on a lot should be in scale to the size of the lot, and
Understood, but you're cutting in a quarter what in residency
not
what's
cutting
allowed
it.
now.
I'm not cutting it a quarter.
It's a quarter of what's allowed now. You're 40%.
No, you're.
Your 20% building coverage translates as 40% FAR. If for a two-story house. In fact, in Amy's analysis,
Yes, you're right.
this actually encourages one-story buildings without finished basements or attics.
Yeah. And what's the problem?
Well, again, you know, her information, not mine, but I read it and agree that FAR has a huge impact on land value.
Prove it.
Well,
I
Tom,
have been,
Tom,
wait a minute, I have been
can
involved in
prove
this,
it, but-
I have been involved in this business for 40 years, and
Yeah, so have I, Tom. So what?
so many hearings where
We
people
just
say,
need to
oh, this
hash
is gonna.
through this so we have a workable bylaw or get rid of
I'm
it,
just
because
saying
right
that
now it's not
everybody
working.
always brings up, whether it's a development going up next door, whether it's, oh, it's going to adversely impact my land
Tom,
value. I haven't
you
seen it
just want
proven
to
in 4
argue. I
years.
understand you want to argue to support your idea, and you have worked very hard on this stuff. I value and respect your commitment, but I think you're just wrong on this one.
Of
I think
course
you
you
just,
are,
I think
because
you're
you
just
keep-
off
well,
based on my 4 decades of experience as an architect.
all right.
So I would like to make a proposal, which is that I think we, as a board, are at loggerheads, and that what we should do is actually get a third-party review of the consequence. So it's not on Clark's shoulders, it's
Thank
not
you.
on Tom's shoulders, it's not on mine, it's not on anyone's. We are at a point where we can't agree, and I don't think the board is going to be able to come up with a unanimous vote. And if we can't come up with a unanimous vote in support of this, we shouldn't be putting it on the warrant. It is not a finished product yet.
Tom, are
So
you listening?
my
Oh,
recommendation would be to have a third party to have us not put ourselves into the argument, bring somebody in to be. And I know it's, and it's not because I'm trying to devalue either Tom or Clark's knowledge of this particular issue, but we're just
We're
fighting
not
like.
making progress. It's flailing around, right? It's no good.
Yeah,
But Tom
and
and I are
so-
both wearing pink shirts, so we have that in common.
Look, this is such a friggin' easy concept to understand.
I
And-
understand it,
And you're
Tom.
purposely obfuscating.
demean the
some of it.
people at
Tom,
town-
it's not
town
just
meeting.
one person. It isn't just one person that feels this way. I have trouble with some of the numbers as they're presented, how we landed on them, what the ramifications are for people in all 3 districts of the town that we're talking about here. I especially think there's larger ramifications for people in the districts with smaller average lot sizes, and especially for people that haven't improved their homes, that may have older homes, and people around them have improved their homes and they've added square footage. Okay. When
Right,
it comes
let me-
down to economics, okay, one of the things buyers and sellers look at is the square footage and the price per square footage of a property. All right. We don't need to get into it any deeper than that. We don't necessarily know some of the ramifications. And that's why I think Amy's point is a good one. If we want to get a third party, how would we do that? Are there
We've
tools
talked about.
for us to
we've
do that?
talk-
Can we do
talked
it?
about-
Let's stop talking.
Well, we've talked about it for 2 years and we haven't been.
Can we
able to
do it?
get
Can we
an
get a
expert,
third
okay?
party?
Talked about
do
it
it.
for 2 years.
Let's just say,
Carolyn,
can we
Carolyn,
do
what
it?
do you think?
The working.
What are
group
the other
has-
towns doing?
No,
What
The
are we
other
looking
towns are
at?
not doing this. That's the challenge.
Understood.
They're not
Understood.
doing it.
Yep.
What this is doing is essentially freezing our development patterns to date. And protecting us against the obvious trend of people pushing limits and building larger and larger houses. And to at least control that by having them in scale. If you have a large lot, you'll get a large house. If you don't, you don't.
Well, it has other impacts.
And then we have
the
other
tax
rules
base,
about
and it-
height and
It
setbacks. and-
freezes a huge growth, for the for the tax base.
I'm
And,
sorry,
and
say-
I don't know if the town is really up for freezing, a
Right.
major component of our tax base, and in tax, growth.
And that would be a point that if we did have a third party look at this, or what Amy is proposing here, should come out in that study. Here's the
Okay.
cost, here's the benefit for this.
I'm
Here's the
gonna-
cost to people, here's the cost to the town, here are the implications to people in the town going forward.
Well,
Excuse
couldn't
me,
town council give us a
going
quick
back to,
study?
going back to the bylaw committee, we have asked the town for help on this. I have begged for help on this for the last 2 to 3 years. And the answer is no. There's no money for it. We're not getting it. Okay?
I think Amy's idea is good, but maybe
think it's a
council
great
could give
idea.
us-
It was an idea. we
Maybe
should have
council
included.
could give us a light review and salvage this for this town meeting. I don't know, but the way it is
Anyway, I will
now,
throw
and
out
again, I
the
agree,
other-
for whatever reason, Tom and I can't have a reasonable discussion about it,
The
and
the
because
alternative.
he
to-
believes what he believes and I say something different.
The alternative to this that I brought up to the select board and discussed in the bylaw committee in the past is that what presents the threat here to the future is the 20% lot coverage figure. So one of the things we could do is stay with the 2-dimensional zoning, not do this change that you all think is too radical, and just lower the
No one
20
said it was.
and
we
just
thought it was
lower
bad.
lower the 20% threshold to 15%. I would support that. And we'll stick with 2-dimensional zoning. You still could have a super large house with 15% large coverage because you're not regulating the bulk. That's fine. Town can do that, but it's the 20% that's the threat to the future. And
I-
that needs to go.
I think it may be too late to make that kind of a different change, but from where we are,
Changing
is,
3
is there
numbers.
time to get a light pass review from council prior to our 30th of September forum?
This has
Is
been.
Carolyn still here?
This
I'm
has
still
been,
here.
this has
Okay.
been reviewed by council.
No,
The
well, that's
concept is not,
different. That's
the
different. than a
concept is not
review.
the concept is not illegal. It's just new. That's all.
I didn't suggest it was illegal.
Well, then why does it need?
Brookline and Newton have them, but
Yes,
no towns like us have them, and I think the numbers are wrong.
then what should the numbers be, Clark? I begged everybody for an
Well,
answer.
that's
Well, I don't.
Everybody
I
sat on their hands
suggest that
last
we're
week
not
when
in
I
the
asked.
outer limit of zoning, and we understand if we're taking value away from future properties, if we're taking value away, we understand that, and we're crystal clear and clear-eyed about that. And that the numbers should be reasonable and probably more than what the existing patterns have been from 1770 on.
You'll never convince me of the economic argument, nor that should be the priority.
So Tom.
So
Well,
either we
The
adjust.
idea is having a discussion. Let Amy talk, Tom.
When and how did you ask for the money to actually have an analysis of this? I am not convinced that the select board of today would say, we're talking about $5,000. We're not talking about $50,000. This is with a person who is skilled in thinking about this as part of their job on a daily basis. You're a lawyer. You're not a land use planner. We might be able to actually resolve whether this is a good or a bad idea. But right now, we have a divided board, and it would be a mistake to bring something with the division, the intensity of the division, to town floor. It just would be terrible.
You're right, Amy. It's not a healthy way to do these things. I mean, in terms of process, you know, a major change like this, we understand it freezes zoning based on the average that's happened over the last 250 years. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. But I mean, Glassmeyer gave us some examples, some analysis, a noted planner's perspective on FAR. And I don't know if you read it, Tom, but what I would like is to be able to say, okay, in relation to your thing, this is where Glassmeyer's notes. This is what I think. Let's discuss it instead of just saying I'm right and this is good.
I haven't been doing that. I've been asking for discussion. You bagged out last week and I sat.
Yeah,
here
because I'm
and-
tired of wasting my time listening to you, Tom.
And I've
You
started,
don't want to engage in a discussion, and
I
don't
asked for
wanna get-
input and everybody met me with silence. So excuse me if I get frustrated, all right?
Well, and the
And
reason
now
that,
it comes
it's
up at
two
the
ways
11th
now.
hour.
It's
It
two
comes up
ways.
at the 11th hour, so that's fine.
Frustration is two
Tom,
ways.
Take it off the warrant. I do not care. I'm not
Good.
going to go to the mat about it, okay?
Good, done.
Fuck, if you just, tired of arguing about it.
So am I, Tom.
What we should do
I mean,
then is at least change the
The problem
footprint.
is it doesn't allow growth. It's not a positive thing that helps people. It's a negative thing that takes value away from future properties. And
You
that's
can't
why I don't like it.
You can't prove that, and
I bet I can, Tom, but let's drop it. You said drop it. Let's drop it. Move on.
here's the frontage.
And we still have 17 minutes before 8 o'clock to,
Here's the frontage thing, very simple concept again, and again, we discussed this last week. The town departed from this in 1969 when a bunch of subdivisions like my street were proposed and permitted and built. Somebody made the decision, that's not how we want the town to develop. We'll be fine with 50-foot little necks going into the back properties and developing lots that way. That's
excuse
fine.
me, Tom.
That's
The Mass
that's-
General laws allows a minimum frontage of 20 feet. Isn't that like the minimum for a
Yeah.
legal lot under
Yeah,
the
and you'll-
Mass General
you'll-
laws?
You see that?
I
in-
think the 50 feet basically is a response to the insane amount of ledge and wetlands that we have here in Cohasset. And I'll bring up as an example how the 50 feet played itself out on Lambert's, on that project on Lambert's Lane. I mean, my God, it seemed like that developer made the best of that as a division with the 50 feet and got his 4 lots in his common driveway. But I don't see the need to change this at this point.
I'm sorry.
Tom, I said I don't see the need to change this because the 50 feet seems to be a response to the intensity of dealing with wetlands and ledge and our potential future developable parcels. It provides that flexibility that's only getting more intense. It's not getting less intense. We don't really have a lot of opportunities for subdivision, which is subdivision, roadway, and house at every different like angle
No, I
on
know.
a new
I
cul-de-sac.
think none of us know what the decision was in 1969 because nobody was here, but I mean, I take the assumption that it was logical that somebody looked at this, and subdivisions obviously involve a more intense development of land and alteration of land.
Well, 17 years ago, I remember talking about this with the planning board members who had been on board, shortly thereafter, and had some continuity with members who were there in 69.
Yeah.
And I think the discussion had to do with 50 feet was a response to the intensely difficult developable environment that we have and the odd conflagration of private ways and common driveways to make projects work or make them as cheap as possible for the developer.
Yeah, and I also, again, by coincidence, in the late sixties, we saw, the town saw a lot of cul-de-sacs being developed too. And again, so there's trade-offs to this, and that's all I'm suggesting to the town is that, we are an outlier compared to other suburban communities with this zoning. We have developed this way. If we had left suburban type frontage, we would have developed a different way. The,
I
the, this,
understand, Tom, but the 50 feet
no, and
brings
part of
flexibility.
this, you're talking about the fiscal, health of the town and value and all that. Part of this is designed to not let Cohasset get to a build-out point. At one point, MAPC told us the Cohasset's potential build-out was 12,000 people. And, we get to that point, the cost of our school system and our services is going to get awfully high, and it's not going to be covered
Sure.
by the
So-
taxes that residences develop. And
Well, with a
so this is a growth control, because, let me just finish my thought, is that if it does lead to the encouragement of more subdivisions as opposed to what we have pork chop lots now, the cost of a subdivision could be prohibitive, and it may be a curb on development. Now, it may not be, but that's the choice we have to make. In 1969, we made a choice to deviate from what suburban towns typically do
All
for their
right, Tom,
zoning.
but we don't have a study, we don't have analysis, we don't have like an impact of what's being proposed here. And so that to drive supporting the change, if you think it's just gonna take value or potential subdivisions out of the mix, you're probably right. But again, it's to me, it's kind of a random change as opposed to something that's done for a specific reason based on analysis and study. We have not done the neighborhood residential pattern analysis that was in the master plan, and we've talked about it off and on, and we've talked about funding, but I think that would help drive some of these changes, explain it and make it reasonable. Like maybe 75 feet isn't enough. Maybe it goes to 100 and 150. I don't know.
I think the
What
original,
other people think?
originally
Tom,
we,
what other people think about this? You've talked enough, and so have I.
I think that this is the same kind of conundrum that we just previously discussed. The absence of actually investigating what it is you're trying to do
Right.
will lead you to have a better understanding of why you want to do it. But at this point, it's all hypothetical. And
it's always
reg-
going to be hypothetical.
Let her finish.
trying to regulate development in the absence of evidence is not a good idea. It's just not a professional idea.
You mean like because it's random?
Well, I mean, this could be a very consequential decision, but we don't even know that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I
Right?
mean, there's the thing that
I'm sorry that
causes the
you
bylaw
don't.
to
I
get
really
changed in the
am.
first place.
It's not rocket science, believe me.
And there's the reasons that you want to change the bylaw in the first place to achieve certain goals, to solve certain problems. And then you draft the language and then you test and see how it's going to impact. In fact, there's two things missing here.
Well, then, you know what? After I'm gone, you guys can take over the process and see if you can get the study money I couldn't get for 3 years. So,
Tommy, you still going to resign after fall town meeting, or should we
becoming
just move on to
increasingly
the
likely.
residential cluster?
It's becoming increasingly likely.
I
Alright.
would make a recommendation that we table this discussion on this particular item so that we're able to get to the end of our task tonight.
Is the last thing the cluster?
Yeah, let me just pull that up.
Well, I think that's pretty straightforward. In fact,
Yeah, the cluster,
you're
whether,
suggesting it go, include residence C and that it get reduced to 5 acres, if, in a nutshell,
Yeah.
if I read that
That-
correctly.
what, it certainly, if we change the frontage, we would need to encourage cluster development more. And Clark, I know you and I have talked, or you mentioned it separately, I've mentioned, so lots of people have said 10 acres is too much, which is why the bylaw is never used.
Sure.
I don't know how big Black Horse Lane was in acreage, but maybe Black Horse Lane could have taken advantage of this every year. So the,
Well, while 5
the-
acres is, or having of the existing 10 acres is unusually flexible
Yeah.
for this discussion, I kind of think we might want to pare it down to 8, maybe 7, if that's the only change other than
Well-
allowing it in residence C.
I don't have the problem with changing it to this only because it's intended to encourage preservation of open space in a
Right.
subdivision. So if there's more encouragement of that, great.
Well, you know, I
I-
think
That's
baby
fine.
stepping,
Everybody, what do you think? Should it go from 10 to 5, 10 to 7?
I mean, baby stepping, I'd recommend we go to 8 if you're allowing residence C, because right now residence C isn't allowed. And we can talk about
No,
the bonus afterwards.
No, the previous bylaw, if you see what's crossed out there, it's the existing bylaw applies to residence B and residence C. It doesn't apply to residence A.
Okay, all right, my mistake.
So the change here is to apply it to any district, but
Yep.
also to reduce the size.
Right, then residence A is fairly tight anyway, so,
Yeah.
and there isn't a lot of it. I
No,
think,
again, I don't expect a lot to happen there, to the extent that it could happen, and especially if we changed frontage, it would happen.
I did the statistics on our residential districts and residence A has 20% of the total. Residence B has 67% of the
Yeah.
total in terms of houses, residential district, and residence C is 13%. Which I thought was interesting. And I didn't even know whether it could be
Well,
30,
yeah.
30, 30, but it's not.
No, I think even the map looks like residence B is far bigger than all the rest, but anyway, the other part of this change is, okay, to even encourage more open space, do you add a density bonus? And I threw in some language about that. And
I read
again,
the-
I think these changes can be made whether we stay with the current frontage or switch. I just think we never see this bylaw used because of the 10-acre threshold, so I just suggest we do it. We make this change anyway, and then we will have touched every part of the bylaw one way or another.
Again, I guess I'd advocate for 8 or 7 instead of 5.
What does everybody else think about that? Mark?
I don't know, I'm focusing on the 5, but that's just because what I've seen, but it's not a lot of,
Does anybody know do we know off the top of the head how
Not-
big Black Horse Lane was? Black Horse Lane would have maybe met the 10-acre threshold if the properties on both sides of the street were owned by the same developer, but they weren't. But the one subdivision we had, I don't know how many, those 4 lots and the original house totaled up to.
Again, we have a 10-acre minimum now.
Yeah,
too much.
5 seems like it's too small. But what do you guys think? I mean, we could leave it the way it is. We could let it ride. We got other things to advocate for in these other changes.
what did I just?
Maybe messing with the cluster is something that goes with the study that Amy's.
So do we
Got it.
know why it's not been used? Do we have actually an explanation?
Yeah, because we don't have the land for subdivisions of a substantial size.
And
All
10
our-
acres, 10-acre minimum has been the problem.
I mean, I don't know that Heritage Lane was I don't know if that was 10 acres, that
It
might have
was
been.
8, it was 8 acres.
8, really? Okay, so I mean, that was one of the biggest subdivisions we've seen in recent times. And
And how much land is left in town for people to have that kind of subdivision
no.
that's not wetlands?
there's not much. but
Clark, do you have any clue or?
Haven't done the analysis.
In the north part of town, there might be,
I mean,
but
I haven't done the analysis, but we've done developable, potentially developable, based on, the assessor's data, in the master plan. So, if we needed to pull that up, I think, this was actually, I think, one of the recommendations of the master plan to reduce this. I'm just
Yeah.
not sure if 5 acre minimum is the right number.
well, if Heritage Lane was 8, that seems like, I mean, that's probably as large as we're going to see.
Hey,
And
we only have
Heritage-
3
Heritage
3 more
Lane would
minutes
have-
with Deidre. What does she have any additional thoughts on this since it's the last thing?
I would be flexible between 5 and 8, but I don't know if we can put in a range, but I guess we have to have specific.
Well, we'd have a
uh,
minimum, and then anything bigger would be fine.
Then I would go as low as 6, if you're gonna have a minimum.
You say 6, I say 8. What is that? What do others think?
Cause if you go 8, that allows someone to go to 10.
No, it doesn't.
No,
No, 8 would be
Okay.
8 would be the minimum. You could
8
have.
would be the
10
minimum
acre.
size, so had
Okay.
had 8 existed as the threshold when Heritage Lane was built, we might have gotten some open space in the Heritage Lane subdivision.
oh, okay.
Their
Sorry.
lots would have been smaller, but they would have had the same number of lots. They would have been a little smaller because we were gaining 45% of open space.
But there might
So-
be some key parcels we'd like to see what the size is. For example,
Yeah.
in between Summer Street and Border Street, there's a 9.7 acre parcel with a house on it that was on the market recently. Well, I just happen to see it on Zillow. But,
Yeah.
Oh, I know the house.
yeah, it's kind
It
of. a
just
cool-
sold,
but-
right, Clark?
but
The
what's
yellow
that?
one just
Yeah,
sold?
the yellow.
Yeah.
I didn't have the 4 million to buy it, but
No, I was up
9.7
there, I
acres,
saw it.
right in the middle of like the harbor. It's
Yeah,
almost hard to
overlooking
believe.
the harbor.
Yeah,
Mhm.
almost hard to believe that exists. But the other big parcels are Bellarmine and
Yeah.
the Oaks. So perhaps it makes sense to model how many parcels would pop up for cluster if it was 5, 6, or 7 instead of 10. It would be
Now-
pretty easy for MAPC to do something like that for us.
Do we have somebody in the planning office? We used to have an engineer who could do a GIS analysis. It
Um,
would be not a very complex task.
Right. Again, I think MAPC could do it for us because we don't have the in-house.
Well, they certainly have plenty of our base maps,
Right. I know they did it before
right?
as a part of the master plan.
So,
So you would
Um,
just change the parcel size from 10 to 5 and see how many parcels that would allow in 7 and see how many parcels that would allow for this. But we might not be able to get this done before the 30th
town meeting.
or
Yeah.
town meeting.
Well, so the worst case scenario is if we go to the town manager and go with the grace of the select board and say, here's where we are. These are the sets of issues that we now face. We would like to complete the transformation of the bylaw, but we can't do it without analysis.
Yeah.
We could postpone these decisions till the spring and essentially send a mission to the town manager and say, we need the resources to be able to do this.
Right.
I'll
I mean,
ask
it's
them-
not
I-
a
We request
responsible
them at
practice.
town meeting. We request them
Since,
at town.
look,
meeting.
since we're withdrawing these articles, the discussion with the select board Tuesday will be very short, and it can just simply consist of, these are being withdrawn because we want more study and we need the resources to do it, period.
And that would be
That'll be a 10-minute meeting, and I'll appreciate a 10-minute meeting, believe me.
Okay, I'm sorry. I need to go. So,
right. Thank you, Deirdre.
Sorry.
We're all
I
set
think
here.
we're winding down.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
all right, so I'm just gonna withdraw these 3 articles and not deal with this anymore. The cluster will stay the way it is. It's, you know, I still, well, the cluster I think should be reduced, but be
I
that.
agree.
How about this? How about 7.5 acre? How about that? It's between 5
Is
and
there,
10.
is there anything to talk about relative to the forum on the 30th?
No. No, I mean, the ones that I have to develop data for that I was gathering beginning today, I don't need to gather data for, but I'll explain. I'll answer anybody's questions and why things are being withdrawn, and very simply. It'll be very simple. It'll be more like last spring's where these are less controversial articles and they should all pass with and just zoom through.
But again, perhaps we need to talk to the town manager about requesting funding at this.
Yeah,
town
that'll
meeting.
happen on Tuesday.
So why don't,
The select, the articles to discuss with the select board that remain is the development, development impact and the frontage and the cluster. And, you know, so they voted just to put forward the FAR one. I'll just tell them to withdraw that, or we're deciding not to go forward with it. And I'll just say to them, so we have nothing else to discuss tonight, but here's what we'd like. We need, if these things that we're withdrawing need to be studied professionally. We've asked for it for years, you know, but the planning board is now asking you to devote the resources for a study.
so why do why Tom, Clark, Amy go to the select board on Tuesday and make the pitch as the nominal organizers of our meetings? It's not, it's really not fair to put all of the responsibility on Tom, which he has borne a huge amount of the total.
I don't care, Amy. I would appreciate you show up. That's fine. But again, if these things are being withdrawn, there's nothing else to discuss with the select board is saying why we're withdrawing them. And the why means we want to study them and we need professional study. Please give us the resources. And again, in the past, they've said no. We got, MAPC did the floodplain one because we got a grant, not because we're paying MAPC, but we have to pay MAPC otherwise. So
Well, in any study, there's
we
what
haven't
would
had
be
a town.
nice to have in terms of scope.
Yeah,
Then there's the minimum. And then there's what would be nice to have plus 50%. So maybe somewhere in those three options, we could get make some progress.
yeah, no, I agree.
But we would have to ask for proposals from MAPC and maybe others.
All right, we can solicit those.
So
We can
Cassandra,
sol-
do we have any GIS capability in the planning office?
So I was just going to jump in on a few points. So to answer your question, Amy, we don't have anybody in the planning office. Julia, the new assistant town planner, has some GIS training. She's starting to onboard with our IT department for GIS related things. The town has contracted with a vendor for their GIS needs. He is working on a lot of things right now. So I don't know if that is a possibility of something for him to do. But on the point of funding, pending any costs from, Carolyn and her teams reviewing these bylaws with you guys, there is still some funding in the account. Obviously, I don't know how much MAPC would charge at this point. It's something that we could look into. But if that's the direction that the board wanted to go, we could certainly explore that.
I make a motion that the board go in that direction.
All right, we don't need a motion. I understand that, and that's what we're gonna do. So we're gonna go forward to town meeting with 7 articles and ask for study for the other 3 and then make a decision at some later date whether changes in those 3 are gonna happen or not.
I would be willing to commit to actually saying we could be a little bit firmer than that. If we can get the analysis done, we will have the answers and we can bring the next 3 bylaws articles to spring.
That's fine. You'll knock yourselves out doing it. That's fine.
I also just wanted to clarify for myself, for tomorrow and what I need to do. So the public hearing notice for the second Section 5 hearing will just be for the development impact, and we can take off the frontage and the cluster development.
Correct.
Okay,
And at the first public hearing, we'll announce that the FAR one is withdrawn too.
yes, that one is already been advertised, so you'll have to go through the
Yeah. No, that-
procedural of
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah, okay. And then, on the public forum, I'll just be, I'll explain that 3 are being withdrawn, but I'll also just be explaining the 7 that are gone forward.
Yep, that's fine.
Right, that's easy enough. It'll become more like the Springtown meeting, so that's fine.
And Carolyn, do you think that you'll have the revisions to the impact bylaw prior to Wednesday?
Oh, absolutely. I could probably get these to you, between now and Friday.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, well, I'll need it for the select board for Monday, well, Monday is the 30th, right?
Monday is the 30th.
Yeah,
Wednesday is
I
the
want
day
to
that-
just, I want to be able to flash the text up on the screen so that people who are on Zoom can see it as well as the people in the room. And then the select board will need to see it as well. And then it won't be again till the following week, the 8th, that I'll meet with zoning. And that's just going to be a virtual meeting, I'm told.
Yes, they just
With
met
the
virtually.
zoning being the only thing on the agenda, we asked them to do it on an off night, so. And then on the 9th, with our public hearings, we have other business to do on the 9th, correct?
On the 9th? No, you just have
Oh, no, okay, good. Let's.
the 82 Border Street was continued to the 23rd.
Okay, good.
So
Good.
pending, I don't know, when A&R coming in, you don't have anything until then.
Yeah, the other thing, we have to think about that I would like to do in place before town meeting, or certainly right after town meeting at the latest, is the changes to regulations, particularly, we're moving stuff from the wind and solar bylaw, but then all of our other regulations, just getting them into a new format. So there's drafts of that I've circulated over the past 2 years. I'll make sure we have that, but we'll have to set up a public hearing, a hearing for that to implement these regulations. So, I'd rather not, particularly like in the wind and solar as examples, rather not wait till the last minute to move everything that we're taking out of those bylaws into regulations. I'd rather do them somewhat contemporaneously with town meeting. Okay. And the other thing I am still doing is going to compile the entire bylaw as it's been changed, at least into a Word document pending, the Cohasset 360 company vendor, catching up with it. But right now we're all caught up. The AG's approved everything to date that we've changed. So, all right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I thank you all for coming out tonight. Special night for this. Appreciate it very much. Any second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Alphabetical roll call.
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan, aye.
Oh, sorry, Amy Glassmeyer.
This is-
Kevin Heine, aye.
Very good to meet you, Shai.
Okay, thank you all.
Good
Thank you,
night.
Carolyn. Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, Cassandra.